brief orientation of the project panel, which is this panel right here. You see it in assembly, you see it in editing, you see it in all of them. And basically what it is a place where all of your media and all of your sequences are stored. In this case, this is one of the project that I chose. I'm going to take this little zoom bar and zoom in a little bit so that I can see these clips more clearly. And what you have in here is you have a media, like for example, this signal right here is video. You can have audio, which will look like this. This will be your sound effects or your music bits, and those are called waveforms. Another media clip, and you might also have images, which appear as a media clip. So images, media, and then you've also got ones called the sequence. And this symbol right here is really important. So let me get up a little bit right here. So this sequence means that it's something that I've edited on the timeline. And I want it, pay attention to that, because when you see the timeline, sometimes you're opening up a sequence. You could have multiple sequences in there. And all of these clips are clips that one of the nice features of it is you can scroll through and scrub, because it's got its own little mini timeline marker under it, so you can see what you've got before you apply it to the timeline. A couple other things to note besides the different types of media is that you've got other browsing methods here, and I honestly haven't used many of them. Generally, I stick with the project, and the project has what you need, and you add and import to this area so that you've got everything that you need to work with when you get to the editing phase. There are a few different view modes, but I tend to stick with this icon view mode. And another thing that's important is when you're in this mode, you can find through search, but you've got something called a new item. And it's worth looking at, because this new item area lets you start a sequence, gives you an adjustment layer, which is something that I can show later, but basically allows you to apply one effect to multiple clips at the same time. A counting leader, which is that 10, 9, 8, 7, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 click, bars and tone, black video, or a color map background. So I'm just going to click on universal counting meter just so you can see. And basically when you add that in, it matches the project settings. You have a few choices here, and then that just becomes another clip, and it adds to your project folder. So the new item icon is something that's useful. As with all things, you can delete it by hitting the clear button or just the delete button and start cleaning up. You can also take items, especially like a sequence. You sometimes might want to right-click that sequence and rename it, just so that you can keep track of the type of sequence that you're doing. But that's about everything that there is to know about the project window that's important. You got views, you've got items you can add, you've got different types of media, the ability to scrub. Sequences are this symbol, media, and audio. Thank you. All right, so this panel right here that I have selected in blue, this is the source panel. And the source panel is a multi-tool. And right now it's not working because the effect control only works when I select a clip that's actually on my timeline. So generally, when you start off with the source, you're really looking in your media browser folder first, and it's giving you a chance to preview and look at a clip before you add it to the timeline. It also gives you the ability to cut that clip before you add it to the timeline, because often there's a go or a take, and you don't really need the entire clip. And while you could put the clip to the timeline and slice it up using the razor tool, it's generally better to work by choosing your start point and then using this mark in button. And what you'll see is a shaded area, and that becomes the start point of the clip. So you're essentially cutting the first part of it. And then towards the end, if you had a particular point that you wanted to end it at, you could mark the end point, and then you're shading that area, and that's designating the part of the clip that you actually want to use. You also have the ability to export a frame. So if you have a single image, and anytime you see this image right here, and I think it's on the timeline viewer as well, it'll take any frame that you want and turn that into a still. So let's say I wanted this to be a still. I would click export frame. It would give me an option here for what type of format I want to use. I tend to work with JPEG. I don't think there's anything wrong with that one, but I'm going to do that. And then you can also import it into the project, or just hit OK. And then that gets added to your media. So now it's kind of tricky because I've got one that's a video clip. Oh, I do need to import it in the project. I'll try that one more time. I'm going to import into the project. That way it's in the box. And then basically I've got that still as a 4.5 second media clip that I can work with. So going back to that, if you like that particular clip, and I'm just showing that button off because it's important, you can take that clip and drag it and drop it straight down to the timeline and it will work. Or you can drag the video only. Now if I click and I hold here, what's going to happen is it won't take the audio with it. And it just saves you a step if you're just after the visual of that particular clip and not the audio. And vice versa. If you're just after the audio of that clip, maybe it's a voiceover, you can take that audio only and then drag it to your timeline, and then it only takes the audio with it. And so basically that's it. One other thing to really pay attention to on both these screens where you're doing a video is this screen right here, which is allowing the zoom level. I've had it happen where people will zoom in on it and not realize that they've done it. And again, you've got these little sliders right here that can let you move up and down. But some people have edited their entire film thinking that something was wrong with the settings of the film, and it wasn't. It was the settings of the viewer. So the easiest one to work with is just fit, because it'll fit the entire frame in the screen, in the panel, and it allows you to see what you're going to see when you export out the film. Preview panel. You also have the program preview panel, which is this panel right here. So it works the same way. You've got a timeline marker right here, which you can also scrub this way, and it just shows you what's on your timeline. You also have the ability to mark in and out. I haven't really found a good reason to do that, at least with the type of editing that we're doing. And these controls here allow you to go one frame at a time, push play, or jump to the end point of your selection. Again, just like you could do before with the preview panel, the program panel lets you export a frame, so you can choose a frame. Like a lot of times people will want to use a still hold for the ending scene and just kind of hold it. They can export the frame, import it into their project, and it would work the same way as before. Go into your media browser panel. The thing I didn't point out was there's also a timeliner right here, and you also have that same thing to zoom in. And again, because this is your final film, when people zoom in, they're going to think that this is what's going to happen, and then when it exports out this way. So pay attention to whether or not that fit is there. There are also a couple other things that you could do with this. There's a comparison view, which allows you to compare clips, but again, it's kind of a complex way to work. Probably a little bit better to just stay off that and keep that view clean, just what your timeline is. And there's a gear right here, allows you to change some of the settings. It's important to know that, but really it's better not to use it. You could use rulers that help you see the pixel ratio. That's kind of important, at least in terms of being able to view. There's also some guides that will allow you to line things up a little better. But a lot of these other things are things where you really don't want to tinker with it. Setting, if you don't understand it, it's not really worth working with it, because again, Adobe can do more things than you need to, but it's there. And again, if nothing else, and you want to see the 1920 by 1080 pixel ratio, so it helps you line things up when you're placing in a graphic or a text, that might be useful. But that's it. That's all there is about the program sequence, program feed. And the first thing that I really think is important, besides the fact that you've got this timeline marker and you can move through it and see in the program window, is the fact that Adobe doesn't necessarily place your clips in this order, but it does keep it relatively small. And there's a time and a place for that, and when you want to see the whole project and see all the little slivers and clips that make up the project, that's a time you might want to see it like this. But for the most part, you're going to want to get closer. And there's two zoom operations on the right and one on the bottom. The one on the right, you've got these circles that you can use to grab and close. When you close that, you start zooming in on the timeline and you start seeing the clips in a little bit larger format. And I definitely, with a complex project like this, when there's that many layers, it's important for you to be able to see everything that you're working with, so that when you have a timeline, you can see what's on top, what's next down, and down and down and down to the very low base layer track. And the same thing applies for audio. When you zoom in on the audio tracks, you start to see these white lines. I'm going to also zoom in horizontally so that these things start to get stretched out. And when I do, this timeline marker at the top, this is 2 minutes 8 seconds, 3 minutes 12 seconds. Those numbers change because the scale is changing. So the closer I get, the more it stretches out my clips so I can see them a little bit better. And also the more it stretches out the timeline marker. And you can actually zoom in so tight that you're now looking at this scene one frame at a time. Just one frame at a time so that you can advance it. And you'll also notice that I'm starting to see these thumbnails of what the clip looks like, and that's because I've zoomed it in a little bit more. You also notice too, on the audio clips there's a white line. That's the volume. It's a really quick way to animate or change the volume up or down on any particular audio clip. The old the command button, you can also create keyframes which allow you to adjust that audio. So basically the key there is that you're seeing more, and sometimes you need to zoom back out and zoom back in, and sometimes you do need to zoom down a little so that you can see, especially in a complex project. But if it's only like a 1 or 2 track film, you can get in close, and it allows you to more naturally work with the elements that you're working with. So keep that in mind as you're editing. Closer look at the timeline, and basically there's one thing that I found really useful that you can do in setup, and that is when you're looking at a clip, and I'm going to zoom in just so that you can see this. I found it useful for me to see individual, they're called continuous thumbnails. And generally what it'll do is just show a thumbnail of what the clip looks like, but when it's a continuous thumbnail, especially for a long clip, when you place that on the timeline, you're going to be able to see a lot more details about how that clip progresses as it moves on. So if scenes are changed or if it's a long shot, it really isn't, there's an advantage, I'm going to move this over here, to being able to see that. And I'll try and demonstrate that with this. When I look closely at this little dino sequence clip, I'm seeing bits and pieces from that animation in the continuous thumbnail view. And to do that, all you've got to do is basically go up here to the 3 hamburger lines and basically make sure that you are setting this up. Continuous video thumbnails, when you click on that, you'll get that view. It's pretty useful. So that's the only thing I've found. Just make sure these things are on. These 3 are blue. No real need to add markers unless you're doing something really complex. What you've got here are video tracks and audio tracks. When you're working with a track, basically you start from the bottom and you work your way up, because the bottom track is what's going to be on the base. And as you add tracks on top of it, it will be on top of the backdrop. So Adobe works that way, to where any layer that you add on, you can add up to 99, I think. And anytime you right click on a space like that that's not on any tracks, you can add tracks, and you get this dialog box that lets you choose as many new tracks as you want. So if I do that, now I've just added video 8 track. So it gets a little complicated, and most films won't use that many tracks, but it's good to know that that's there. When you do have multiple tracks like this particular sequence, basically it's 3 elements. One is a shadow, and I believe that's this track, and one is the dinosaur, which is this track, and then I've got the bottom, which is the image track. You do have the ability in this interaction to do some things within an individual track. One thing is to lock the track, and all that does is prevents anybody from moving it. Once it's in place, you can lock the entire track. But generally when we're editing, we don't want it to be locked. We want it to be free. And the other one that's useful is this, the toggle track output. So you have an eyeball right here, and I'm looking at this program window. When I close one of the tracks off, you'll see the eye gets crossed off. Oops, I just accidentally zoomed out there. You'll see that the eye gets crossed off and the track becomes invisible. It allows you to see like one thing at a time. So again, I could make the shadow disappear, so I could just focus on the dinosaur element, or vice versa, or I could have both elements kind of show without the background. But that basically is a toggle switch that allows you to see more clearly what's going on. Beyond that, there's one other thing that's really important, and that is this. Sometimes this source patching V1 ends up checked off, and what happens when that happens is if I bring a clip down from my media box, it's going to stop you from bringing a video clip in. Right now I'm trying to bring everything in and only will do video, or only will do audio. And vice versa. If I have both tracked off, then I guess that doesn't matter. Basically they need to be both on or both off, and it throws people off because when they're working for the first time, this somehow inadvertently gets toggled, and it just makes it hard for you to start adding clips to your timeline. So check that. Make sure that that's on, or apparently if they're both off, it works the same. I should do a little bit more thinking about that. See how that works. Here's one kind of important thing to do about when you're moving video from your source to your timeline. And it's got to do with these blue highlighted areas and how you copy and paste. And I just figured I'd start from the middle here, and I'm going to make sure that we can see 3 tracks of each for this to work, just so that you can see how it works. Now I've already said you can take drag video only, which allows you to drag video only, or drag audio only, which allows you to drag only an audio track. If you're dragging both of them, your first drop is going to determine what track that they're on. And so if you hold over a video track or an audio track, that it matches it on the other side. So this is track 1, track 2, track 3. And so that's kind of one of the setups, is it helps you build multi-layer tracks, but generally we're going to be working with track 1 and track 2 most of the time. Now these buttons right here are source patching for inserts and overrides, and I don't think we're going to do a lot of that editing in beginning class. But if one's on and not the other, here's what happens. When I try and take the video and audio down, I only can choose one. If it's vice versa, then I can only choose the other. Or, yeah, right. If they're both on, then it allows me to put both in. And if they're both off, it allows me to put both in. The override is just an editing function that we don't need, but these buttons, we either need them both on or both off. And if you see that that's happening, it's something to check. Now these tracks right here is for targeting a track basically when you're copying. So here's the setup. If you copy this layer and hit Command C or right click, copy, and then you paste it, sorry, not a ripple delete, not a ripple delete. I can't paste it. Well, Command V should do it. Nothing happened because it basically overwrote in that track, and it did it because I told it to do it. That's what these things are saying. And you can have more than one, which opens up some options, but it really lets you target one track at a time. So if I wanted to copy this track, I'll try that again, and paste it to video track 2, now that I've got these things selected and no other tracks, when I hit Command V, it's going to do exactly what I told it to. So it allows you to target your pasting, your copies. And that's useful because sometimes when you're copying and pasting, you end up copying over your clip and you don't intend to. Besides those things, it's really not necessary to know it, and the most important part is to just check these 2 source patching, because again, it can interrupt your ability to drop a clip onto the timeline. But if you are doing some copying and pasting and you don't want to have to drag it, move it to an empty spot and then drag it where you want it, that's the way you can target where you want to go by toggling these tracks. A little emphasis and focus on the toolbar this time for this video, and that is this little section right here. In almost all forms of Adobe, you're going to see this toolbox, and the default tool is this tool right here, the selection tool. That's where you have the arrow, and most interactions that you're doing with your timeline can be done with that tool. But there are other tools that can be used, and a few that are more common than others. One thing to point out too is whenever you see this little arrow right here, it means that there are other tools buried within that particular button. So if you click and hold it, you have 2 options under that: track select forward and track select backwards. You've also got this tool, the rippling edit tool, but it can also be the rolling edit tool or the rate stretch tool, which allows you to change the speed of a clip visually instead of clicking on it. Another common tool is the razor tool. The razor tool is basically allowing you to cut scenes while they're on your timeline. So wherever you apply the razor, it just splits a scene into 2. It's a common one. So these 2 are very common. These ones are a little bit less common for a beginning user. And then you've got the slide tool, which is the slip and slide, which are different ways to move clips. You've got the pen tool for creating shapes. You've got the hand tool and the zoom tool. And then, of course, another commonly used one is the type tool. And one thing to point out on that is that the type tool, when you click on it, you've got horizontal type, which is the default, and you can also do vertical type, so that when you're putting text boxes onto your timeline, you can do it either way. That's it.